This is In the Loop. I'm Christian Bryant. Folks, that pollen is hitting. So if my eyes look a little red, it's because of allergies and definitely not the fact that I've been staying up late to tear through The Circle, a catfish drama on Netflix. Here's what we got for y'all. This week, President Biden hits his 100th day in office. We dig into some of his promises and where he stands on getting those done. Then, Facebook makes a call on whether to let former President Trump back online. But first, here's what you need to know right now. If you are fully vaccinated, in most cases, there's no need to wear a mask outdoors. The new guidance from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention was officially issued today.
For those who haven't gotten their vaccination yet, especially if you're younger or think you don't need it, this is another great reason to go get vaccinated. Now.
Multiple studies have already found the risk of COVID transmission outside to be minimal. If you are vaccinated and outdoors, it's even less of a risk. Keep in mind, folks are considered fully vaccinated 2 weeks after their final COVID-19 shot. In the US, more than 95 million people, or just under 30% of the population, have been fully vaccinated. But we aren't quite back to normal yet. Several cities still have their own mask mandates in place for public spaces. The CDC says a mask should be worn in public, crowded outdoor events, and indoors.
We will continue to recommend this until widespread vaccination is achieved.
Baby steps, y'all. Baby steps. President Biden plans to sign an executive order that will boost the minimum wage for federal contractors to $15 an hour. That's up from $10.95. The executive order will take effect next year. The White House says thousands of federal workers will be directly impacted, but it could also have a wider impact, forcing private employers to up wages to compete for workers. The fight for 15 has been brewing for a while now. Several cities have already made the move. Some states have gradual increases to get there in coming years. In the recent COVID relief bill, Biden tried to increase the full federal minimum wage, which is currently at $7.25 an hour, but Senate rules blocked the move. Biden's new executive order also gets rid of the tipped minimum wage for federal contractors. Currently, employers are allowed to pay workers $7.65 an hour as long as their tips put them over the regular minimum wage. There's a lot to unpack from the 2020 census results besides just the country's population, but in case you are wondering,
according to the 2020 census, the number of people living in the United States was 331,449,281.
Here are some other big takeaways. As some states grew faster than others, there was some shifting of seats in the House of Representatives. Texas gained 2. 5 other states gained 1. 7 states lost a seat, including California for the first time in history. Meanwhile, New York was just 89 people shy of keeping all of its seats. The shift not only impacts the amount of federal money states get, it also gives those gaining a seat the opportunity to shape new congressional districts. Democrats only control the House by a narrow margin. If a handful of those seats flip, Republicans could regain control in the 2022 midterms. The growth in states gaining seats also backs up an 80-year trend. Americans have moved out of the industrial Midwest and Northeast and headed to the South and West. Overall, the US population is still growing, but slower than usual.
In fact, the growth rate from 2010 to 2020 is the second slowest in US history.
Experts say that slow growth points to an aging population, slowing immigration over the last decade, and the lingering aftermath of the 2008 recession. President Biden is closing in on 100 days in office, and one way he's marking the occasion, like other presidents before him, is by taking a look at how effective he's been in keeping campaign promises. Biden took over in the middle of a pandemic that devastated American labor. Newsy's Bianca Pascini tells us how he's done in getting workers back on their feet.
The concept of the first 100 days is widely associated with President Franklin D. Roosevelt. He was elected in the throes of the Great Depression in 1932, tasked with bringing the economy back to life. This week, President Joe Biden will meet that 100-day mark while facing a similar scenario. He's promised to turn the economy around after the COVID-19 pandemic pushed millions into financial uncertainty.
If we act now, our economy will be stronger in both the short and long run.
Traditional indicators show the economy is in recovery mode under President Biden. Unemployment has fallen 0.3%. Consumer prices are up, and And the Atlanta Fed expects 8.2% GDP growth in the first quarter of the year. But he hasn't achieved everything he said he would in the first 100 days.
We're going to raise the corporate tax rate.
Raising the rate to 28%, up from 21%, would fund the administration's $2 trillion infrastructure plan. But that proposal has plenty of critics in Washington.
That's not the right thing to do.
A big tax increase is not the way to go.
Now is not the time to raise taxes after we've gone through a global health pandemic.
President Biden will provide more detail for his vision for the economy Wednesday during his first address to a joint session of Congress. That includes his next big spending bill, the American Families Plan, featuring investments in childcare, paid leave, and education. Bianca Ficini, Newsy, Washington.
As we said earlier, nearly 100 million people in the U.S. have been fully vaccinated, which is a good sign for the Biden administration and how they've guided the ongoing fight against COVID-19. So what exactly do the next 100 days look like? Newsy's Kellen Howell tells us more.
100 days into his administration, President Biden has blown past his benchmarks for COVID-19 vaccinations. Now, the U.S. top expert on infectious diseases tells Newsy there's real hope that by the end of the next 100 days, life could be looking a lot more like it used to.
I would hope that we are going to see ourselves in that real pathway, recognizable pathway towards normality. Not necessarily all the way there. I don't think that's going to happen for a while, but at least it will be noticeably on that pathway.
But experts warn the next steps in the battle against COVID won't get any easier. The drop in new cases is plateauing, and vaccination supply seems to be outpacing demand. The CDC's latest 7-day average for vaccinations is just over 2 million doses. That's down from over 3 million 2 weeks ago. Dr. Fauci says the downturn is normal as more older and vulnerable people are being vaccinated and younger, less eager people become eligible for jabs.
What that means is that we have to and are putting in an extra special effort to extend ourselves out to the people who want to get vaccinated but are not, they need a little push, or people who are still skeptical about it and you want to turn them around.
The Biden administration says it's taking steps to make it easier for working Americans to get vaccinated. Last week, President Biden offered U.S. businesses tax incentives to give their workers paid time off to get the shot and recover from any side effects.
No working American should lose a single dollar from their paycheck because they chose to fulfill their patriotic duty of getting vaccinated.
But some public health experts say the White House could go a step further by encouraging private companies to incentivize younger Americans to get vaccinated with perks.
I think we're going to have to get really creative and, essentially reward people for getting vaccinated.
That could include businesses giving out freebies to vaccinated customers, or special sections at sporting events and music venues for people who have gotten their jabs. But skepticism is also a major problem. Recent polling from NPR and Marist shows 25% of Americans say they won't get vaccinated. Hesitancy is particularly high among those who live in rural areas. Dr. Fauci says he's confident that more people will get shots when they see others in their community rolling up their sleeves. But if current levels remain the same, restrictions on social gatherings and indoor mask requirements are here to stay.
If you really want to be free of the constraints, get vaccinated.
Kellen Howell, Newsy, Washington.
And if you really want to break from having me cut in and open my big mouth, just stay right there. Spotify, the streaming platform that seems to know my musical tastes better than I do, got a little something for the podcast listeners. Here's what's trending. Spotify's big leap into podcasting has reached its natural end game. The streaming service is rolling out a new subscription service specifically for podcasts. Podcasters who use Spotify's Anchor platform will soon be able to mark some of their episodes as premium, available only to paying subscribers. Subscription prices can be set at $3, $5, or $8 a month. This is all a part of Spotify's big push to turn an even bigger profit on podcasts. The streaming service has already acquired big podcast companies like Gimlet and has funded high-profile celebrity podcasts like the Barack Obama-Bruce Springsteen collab, Renegades. Spotify's announcement comes 1 week after Apple also unveiled its own plans for podcast subscriptions. If this trend catches on, and if listeners are willing to shell out the extra dough, it could create a new source of funding for podcasts, without the interminable ad reads for mattresses and meal boxes. In an all-out push to vaccinate its youth against COVID, the state of West Virginia is turning to the best motivator in the book, cold hard cash.
We're going to give a $100 savings bond to every single one that steps up and takes their vaccines.
The state's governor, Jim Justice, says every West Virginian between 16 and 35 who gets vaccinated will get a $100 bond, paid for with federal COVID relief money. The state estimates about 380,000 people are eligible for the program. West Virginia's kind of been throwing money around to help navigate the pandemic. Earlier this month, the state said it'll pay remote workers from across the nation $12,000 if they relocate to the state. Now, obviously, it'll be a little harder for some of us to get that remote work money. But if anyone's got a line on any dark, empty office buildings in West Virginia, I am most certainly listening.
Your information is for sale. You have become the product.
Usually not the kind of phrasing you want to hear in a tech ad, but Apple's latest iOS update is aiming to be an exception. The company's touting a new push to protect user privacy. iOS 14.5 includes a new feature called App Tracking Transparency, which requires apps to ask permission before tracking your data across multiple sites. The feature makes it less of a hassle to prevent companies from collecting data on their users, both in their apps and around the internet. This could be a huge blow for tech companies like Facebook, which rely on that data to feed the lucrative advertising engine. Opting out of this tracking makes it tougher for companies to tailor ads to users, which makes those ad spots less valuable. The new iOS update also includes a variety of more mundane features like new Siri voices, support for Xbox and PlayStation 5 controllers, and improved facial recognition for Apple Watch users. Have you noticed a certain someone missing on Facebook? I haven't, because I'm only there to make sure I actually know people's birthdays. Former President Donald Trump has been booted from the platform since January, but Facebook's oversight board will rule on whether to open the doors back up for President Trump. Newsy's Tyler Atkinson tells us more about how the board is weighing the decision.
Facebook's oversight board said it will decide whether to reinstate former President Trump's account in the coming weeks after suspending it following the January 6th insurrection by his supporters. When Facebook first referred this decision to its oversight board, Vice President of Global Affairs Nick Clegg said, "We hope and expect the board will confirm our decision to ban Trump." But Newsy spoke to experts who said the decision will hinge on whether the board just looks at Trump's posts from the day of the Capitol insurrection or his entire Facebook activity.
If the oversight board looks broadly at the case of Donald J. Trump, that analysis might well encompass his behavior going back, to well before the election, to go back to when he first began to declare that the election would be rigged. They might say that with that as backdrop, his statements on January 6th are much more pernicious than they might seem if you look just at the statements in isolation.
From a legal perspective, there might not have been explicit language indicating incitements of violence. But from a communication ecology perspective, you can imply something, have it be in that legal gray space, and still have these incredibly damaging effects.
If the former president is reinstated to Facebook, it could push other social media companies to put him back on their platforms and lead Facebook to change how they moderate the accounts of other world leaders.
Facebook is very much the first one out of the gate, so I think a lot of other platforms, like what Facebook does, will set a precedence for how other platforms will react to it.
If the oversight board overturns the Facebook decision, it will be very significant. For starters, I think Facebook will say, well, that's it for us. We're never going to yank an American politician again, short of the politicians saying, go home and get your guns, people, and take Congress physically hostage.
Facebook's oversight board said it received more than 9,000 public comments on Trump's case. No matter how it rules, all eyes will be on the board, a company-appointed group of international experts on law, speech, journalism, and politics.
Whether we really believe that Facebook can outsource this decision and not be accountable for it, I think gets to the core of whether or not the entire oversight board experiment will work.
Tyler Adkisson, Newsy, Chicago.
While they deliberate, I'd like the board to deliver a pretty swift punishment to my family members who just be typing stream of consciousness messages on Facebook. Sorry, Aunt. COVID vaccinations have ramped up in the US, but the number of Latinos getting vaccinated isn't keeping pace with the number of coronavirus cases and deaths they are suffering. Newsy's Lindsay Thies examines why they're falling behind in getting a vaccine and why it's especially complicated for some Latino women, where healthcare often comes down to a matter of trust.
Significa el sol.
Maria Carolina shows the masks she's made by hand to help protect her community. She's 34, a single mom and a farm worker in the US since 2018 from Guatemala. This past year, she's seen COVID hit hard.
Es muy duro.
It has been so difficult living through the pandemic because the protection was just not there, and it was so easy for any of us to become ill.
In Florida, where she lives, 41% of COVID cases are Latino, but only 22% of those vaccinated are Latino.
There's still vast discrepancies between various racial and ethnic groups.
A new analysis from the Kaiser Family Foundation shows it's the same for Latinos in almost every state. Colorado, 42% of cases, only 10% of vaccinations. In Arizona, 14% of vaccinations have gone to Latinos, but they make up for 40% of cases. North Carolina, 6% of vaccinations, 21% of cases.
So why is this happening? Well, there's several contributing factors: availability, lack of information in Spanish, vaccine times that conflict with schedules of a lot of these individuals who are essential workers, and documentation.
That's the situation with Maria. She was able to get her first dose during a hospital stay, but can't get her second because she doesn't have the required Florida driver's license or state-issued ID. And then there are people who don't trust the vaccine, the drug makers and the government. And you don't have to look far back to see why that distrust runs so deep for many Spanish-speaking women. 1970s California and the landmark case Madrigal v. Quilligan. 10 working-class Mexican-origin women sued Los Angeles County General Hospital, saying they'd been coerced into getting their tubes tied minutes to hours after undergoing C-sections. It doesn't end there. September 2020, a whistleblower complained of forced hysterectomies on women detained in ICE facilities. It fuels skepticism that isn't isolated to one region.
Those resonate in people's mind. Is this vaccine going to make me sterile? Is this a way for the government to make us not to be able to have children, right? Children being a wealth of our community.
Battling the doubt isn't easy. For Dr. Martinez Bianchi, it means spending extra hours out in her community to help.
This weekend, we vaccinated 2,075 Latinos in six churches and a credit union, the Latino credit union. And then I realized, oh, but we have 90,000 people that haven't gotten a vaccine yet.
Hayward, California, the trust is there if it's coming from La Familia, a multicultural organization with a 40-year track record of engagement in the Latino community. They've been working with FEMA and the state to be a trust broker of sorts for vaccines.
If they didn't want to take it 2-3 weeks from now, as they find out that family members have taken the vaccine, they feel more comfortable and they're taking it.
Their staff calls hundreds a day in Spanish, focusing on cultural competency and language. CEO Aaron Ortiz says it's key to their successful turnout.
So how many people have you vaccinated here total, and how many of them are Latino or Latina?
So total that have taken the vaccine here, close to 3,200 with a week and a half. 80 to 90% of the people that have been vaccinated here have been Latinos.
About a third of the people getting vaccinated at community healthcare centers are members of the Latinx population, which is a lot higher compared to the national average of Latinos getting vaccinated at these mass vaccination sites, which sits at about 11%.
But the trust in Hayward isn't as commonplace as it should be, Martinez Bianchi says.
We need to take it away from the people's hesitation to the trustworthiness of government systems, trustworthiness of health systems, and providers of vaccine.
Moving forward, analysts think that Latino vaccination numbers could get better, but it will really vary depending on the experiences people have had with the healthcare industry where they live. For Newsy, I'm Lindsay Thies reporting.
If you haven't done so already, feel free to reach out to us on Twitter using the hashtag #NewsyInTheLoop. Now's the time to form a relationship with the show because soon we'll be outside and maskless and unavailable. A white Minnesota police officer who was accused of shooting and killing 20-year-old Dante Wright, a black man, now faces manslaughter charges. The officer says she thought she was firing a taser. It's drawing comparisons to a similar case in Oakland, California, more than 10 years ago, and prompting questions about why this is still happening. National reporter Bo Evans has more.
Some see a train station. Wanda Johnson just sees her son.
He always strived to be a leader. He was so excited to be a father because his life was cut short. You know, he didn't get to live out the whole entire goals that he had set for himself.
When she sees the news, she sees her son Oscar Grant III too.
Taser gun confusion. It just brings up a whole well of memories and, you know, missing Oscar.
On April 11th, officers pulled Dante Wright over in Brooklyn Center, Minnesota. According to the former police chief, officers tried to arrest Wright when they learned he had a warrant, but Wright tried to drive off. Police say Kim Potter then mistook her gun for her taser, shooting and killing Wright. She can be heard on body cam footage yelling taser. Potter, who since resigned, is charged with second-degree manslaughter. For Wanda, it's history repeating itself. An officer shot and killed Oscar at a BART station in Oakland, California on New Year's Day 2009. The officer involved said he thought he was reaching for his taser when he pulled his gun.
My heart goes out to his family because now the baby has to grow up just like Oscar's daughter without the father.
Her attorney, John Burris, feels similarly.
It's hurtful to see young people's death at the hands of the police, particularly when it doesn't have to happen.
Following Oscar's death, there were calls for change in the way officers were trained.
When the Oscar Grant shooting occurred, we did start a real national level conversation in police training circles about these taser, we call it a slip and capture error.
Betsy Smith represents the National Police Association. She and John Burris agree training has improved.
When the Oscar Grant shooting happened, we had to talk about weapon confusion, and then we also had to talk about motor programming.
You got to reach across your body to pull it out, or you got to use your left hand or whatever your weak hand is.
Betsy says taser training is now more focused on motor control or muscle memory.
Police officers are dealing with all kinds of, dangerous tools. We have to drive, we have to use firearms, we use batons and tasers and spray and all that stuff. All that involves motor programming.
Betsy says officers now practice repeatedly pulling their tasers across their body until it becomes second nature.
Since Oscar Grant, there's been about 10 of these types of cases.
Reporting by the New York Times shows these types of incidents have happened 15 times in the last 20 years. But that doesn't bring much solace to mothers like Wanda.
Maybe our society needs to redesign the tasers so that they don't get confused with a taser and a gun. How many times have we heard of an officer using pepper spray, a gun instead of pepper spray, or a billy club instead of pepper spray? How many times have that happened?
Until then, Wanda will continue to honor the memory of her son.
Try to help other families who go through what I've gone through and what I'm going through.
In Oakland, California, at the Fruitvale BART station, I'm Bo Evans reporting.
That's it for us, gang. As always, thanks for watching. No show tomorrow, but you can catch me during live coverage of President Biden's address to a joint session of Congress tomorrow, starting at 7 p.m. Eastern. Top stories from Newsy are headed your way right now.